you're
Take
looking
next.
at. Yes?
You're on.
Henry asked me a question about,
On the record.
on the record. Was the war on when I was in high school?
Yes.
No, I didn't ask you if the war was on, I wondered what,
I'm sorry, Henry, would you repeat your question?
my question was, given that you were at high school, 1941 to 1944, how aware were you and the students aware of what was going on
You mean the war?
during the war?
You know, very frankly, I really wasn't significantly aware of it at all. I don't even myself recall rationing or food. There was food rationing, so you couldn't just go out in the grocery store and get whatever you wanted. It's not in my mind as a standout point. I'd have to be drilled to remember it. So I
That the war was going on while you were in high school.
Well, I was aware of the war, but Henry's asking me.
But I mean, it was a part of your day-to-day life. It wasn't.
But I mean, was it something that,
That's what you're saying.
it sounds like not something that everybody followed on a daily basis, or no?
Oh, I'm sure they followed on a daily basis because our soldiers were getting killed on a daily basis. It was a brutal, bad, tough war.
Did you save aluminum
But as a high
foil
school
or
kid-
string or anything like that?
What?
Did you save aluminum foil at home?
No, I told you none of that's
You
in my
don't
mind.
remember that, okay.
In high school.
And as a high schooler, though, although it was brutal, bad, whatever, you're remembering it. You're certainly facing eventually draft.
I wasn't facing a draft because I enlisted.
Well, okay, right.
I enlisted. I don't know where we're skipping to.
That's
But
fine.
in January of 1944, I enlisted as a.
When you graduated.
I hadn't even graduated.
When you graduated.
I was already in college before I graduated, so I didn't see
Would have
my.
thought if you had not had your infection.
So now describe.
That's another subject.
So now describe that.
That's
Describe.
another
We're gonna try
That's
some
another
little
thing.
sequential stuff here. Focus. Describe.
No, I know what he's saying, Henry.
I know exactly what you were
He
saying.
didn't want to jump too far ahead because we always.
Try- Okay.
He
You
was loving.
you went through Heights. You enlisted. Now you just said you were in college before you finished high school. Talk about that. How did that happen?
Oh, before I do that, let me go back to the war again and my experience as a child. One thing I vividly remember, which is a humorous thing now, in a sense, was there was rationing, as I mentioned, not just of food, but of other materials, including but not limited to shoes. And some Sunday in 1943, I was working at Meyer Miller's shoe store in the Jewish area of Glenville. And the day before, all kinds of rationing was announced, and we sold out the store. Everybody, and he could afford it, 8 pair of Florsheim shoes, anything they could buy. I worked my butt off from the beginning of the day to the end of the day. I probably made, in my own mind, probably exaggeration, a couple $100 in commissions because we sold the whole store out. So that part, which isn't dramatic about the war, I remember. How did I get into college before I graduated from high school? I enlisted in what was called the Army Specialized Training Program. And instead of going right in the Army, I went to Ohio University, where my daughter Beth later went, in Athens, Ohio.
I never knew you did that.
I'm telling you now,
That's
to
interesting.
study my favorite subject, engineering. I remember vividly being the low on the pole in physics, in chemistry. We didn't have biology, so being first in English. I'm dealing with children who came, excuse me, I didn't tell you this, from the prep schools in New England, Coet, and those other schools, and I'm competing with them. But I was first in English, or close to first, in history, but everything else I was in trouble. All the scientific, I just wasn't, and math, I wasn't good at that at all. And through April 17th, 1944, I was an irregular regular. By that I mean I was in the Army Specialized Training Program. On April 17th, 1944, I was sent into active infantry military service in Jacksonville, Florida, Camp Landing, where we did the real thing, preparing for war.
So you graduated from high school in January. You were at OU from January to April, and in April you were shipped out.
Wasn't shipped out. I
Shipped to
was
Florida.
trained out.
Okay, trained out.
They put us on a train. It seemed nice. From the terminal here in Cleveland at that time, there was a rain. Terminals were in the terminal tower.
Trains.
I mean trains, but a train terminal is what I was trying to express. And they sent us right down to Jacksonville. Well, actually, excuse me, I jumped the spot. They sent us to Fort Wright, not Fort Wright, but
No, Fort Mitchell?
no, it's right near
Yeah.
Fort Wright. Oh gosh. I can't-
Okay, Fort Thomas.
Fort Thomas, Kentucky, for about 3-4 days in the army, because we marched and we were dressed up like soldiers, and it was terrific. All of a sudden, they ordered us out in the train, down, and when you got off the train in Jacksonville, you were in a different world. It wasn't Jacksonville, it was Camp Landing. You were then a soldier being trained to
Is
fight
this
the
Texas?
battle.
April 1944, Florida.
Florida. Oh.
I
Like
mean,
Jacksonville.
then
Oh.
whatever I knew about the war was vividly, not in a movie, but in me. And it was really a startling change because you were treated as what you were, being prepared to be a combat soldier. And that was a very stressful, difficult life, except at 18, I thought I was heroic. So you won't believe this, son.
Going through that.
Marvin,
Can't imagine.
healthy, I could say beautiful young man, 5 feet 3 and 5 feet 11 and 3/4, 150, 55 pounds, volunteered for 2 things, the ski corps, para-
The
What?
ski corps.
the ski
Patrol.
corps,
Ski patrol.
ski patrol.
Uh-huh.
What did I say wrong?
Nothing, I just was
And
surprised.
the parachute.
Paratroopers.
Fortunately, or unfortunately, because there were brethren of mine who did do that and were killed. Somewhere in the 12th or 13th week of basic training, developed a very severe case of blood poisoning. And I was treated by the Army doctor right outside wasn't the main hospital. This Camp Landing had a big-time hospital, took soldiers from all over the world, but this was the base hospital. And he cut me and sent me back to my unit. And I was very sad about it because I was afraid I wouldn't get to finish the 17 weeks of basic training with repeat automatic rifles, machine gun, the whole thing, because I wouldn't get to go home for a week, which was your 17-week break.
Reward.
How did you get blood
I'm not
poisoning?
saying
You
that.
didn't- Furlough. How did you get blood
I do
poisoning?
not know the answer, but I was carrying a heavy weapon, not a machine gun, but a Browning automatic rifle. And since I was a young, brave, I must have had all these movies in my mind. Soldier, I was carrying someone else's weapon, an older man, probably 35 years old, because the time I was in, there were boys 18, and there were men 38, seemed like grandfathers to me. I was carrying his weapon too, and it hurt my leg, and I didn't know what was wrong. Anyway, the guy opened it up, sent me back to the barracks, and that's the last time I was on the ground for a long time, because I was shipped into the major hospital with a very severe infection. They did surgery, and they gave me sulfa without the amount of water you're supposed to give, and I really was a very sick young man.